on the role of HR leaders in supporting the civil service through a general election. So my name is Katie Crothall. I'm the head of talent here at WIG, and my role is to support WIG's vision of a country where leaders collaborate for the common good. So we enable collaboration by championing cross-sector dialogue, leadership capabilities and evidence of what works. And here in the talent team, we look after secondments, bespoke mentoring, the Charity Next programme, which we partner with FSET with, NED and trustee recruitment, all with a cross-sector lens. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Rupert McNeil to join us today. So I suspect to most of the people on the call today, he needs no actual introduction, but for anyone that doesn't, so Rupert is the former government chief people officer, currently a senior advisor at KPMG in Saudi Arabia, where he is currently right now, previously HR director at Lloyd's, partner at Arthur Andersen and Deloitte, founder of Optimal Organizational Outcomes. I could go on, but his full bio is up if you want to have a look at it. So yes, just leaves me to say thank you again, Rupert, for joining us this morning. I'm going to hand over in a moment, and we're going to enjoy sort of about 20 minutes of reflections before opening up to Q&A. And Rupert has actually said all questions will be answered, so please do put your answers in the questions in the chat as we go through. Just as a reminder, the first part will be recorded, but the second part, the Q&A, will be under Chatham House rules. And so if you are posting questions in the chat, do please just put who you are and where you're from, just so that we can reference that when we go through. So without further ado, Rupert, thank you. And yes, welcome.
Thanks, Katie. Well, thanks everyone for joining. It's a real privilege to be doing this. My qualification for this is I think probably twofold. I went through quite a few changes of ministers and some general elections during the 6 years that I was in the Cabinet Office and civil service. But actually, as I was reflecting ahead of this, I've been through a lot of leadership transitions. I'm 57 years old, started my career in organisations when I was 22. And through that period, I've seen chairmen change, CEOs change, our partnership in Arthur Andersen, to all of those cases at the micro. And there's a great German sociologist, Nicholas Lerman, who wrote a book on the new boss. I recommend it. And this is all related to that question about how to deal with a new boss, and how to deal, more importantly, as HR professionals, perhaps specifically, with how to help your other colleagues and the system and the organisation deal with the new boss. And I'm going to break this up into a few parts that I hope are practical, and then look forward to any questions as Katie has said. So the first thing to say is I suggest that we all pause and admire what is going to happen at the end of this week. I was thinking of metaphors for this, and I was thinking of the great things that you see in nature, like the migration of whales, or the wildebeest moving across the Serengeti in that massive migration. What we're about to see, particularly in Downing Street, with removal vans coming and going, and people applauding people as they come in through the door, or leave the door and then come in through the door, is quite amazing. It's probably one of I think it might be the oldest, sort of most continuous example of the peaceful transfer of power anywhere in the world. And that allows me to say what my political position is, which is I'm a constitutional patriot. And I believe passionately in the rule of law. And this is a great example of that peaceful transfer of power. And as we saw in the US a few years ago, these things aren't to be assumed. And I don't think someone playing things will get better outside the gates of Downing Street does anything to change that fact. So in fact, I think it reinforces it. Two favourite facts, by the way. My top fact that I learnt while I was in government was that the last captain of the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier has not yet been born. That's a cool fact. And the other is that Rishi Sunak will have to pay for his own removal van, which does seem a bit mean, actually. Moving on. So what's going to happen? Well, I think this is let's lay out a few thoughts. One is that as a good friend of mine described it, who'd seen a lot of administrations, both Labour and Conservative, he said, you need to remember, Rupert, that fundamentally, and this, by the way, is not a politically charged remark, it's just a sort of observable fact. Conservative parties, they might like individual servants, civil servants, but they don't really like civil servants. They don't like having civil servants. They don't like lots of civil servants, right? So that's their focus on reducing the size of government. The way that Labour governments have tended to deal with this is through organisation of the machinery of government and the system. So I say that because MOGs, Ministry of Government changes, are in your futures, I suggest. Just because they always are when you have administration changes like this, but even more so given the way in which Labour look at things. If it's Labour, so let's make another point. So I don't think that we are particularly good as a country, certainly not as a civil service, or media, at predicting what will happen in events such as this. I was in the office of Jeremy Hayward on the night of the referendum when we'd been told that we'd obviously been told we couldn't prepare for the new what might happen if there was a yes vote to leave, so we're not good at predicting that, and so who knows? So let's start with that hypothesis. Okay, so this is what happens if Count Binface's party wins. Okay, let's put that to not politically charged, or Reform wins. And this, I think, is an interesting thought experiment, because it highlights one of the things that I observed and have observed in all these sort of changes. So first of all, going to the psychology of this, and everything we do as HR professionals really should be based in evidence-based psychology. So the first thing is that about 30 to 50% of people actively resist change, okay? Subconsciously or unconsciously. That's what we're told. I've also been told, but I've not been able to verify it, that only 30% actually like change. Now, the 30% that like change, I hypothesize, are correlated with the unusual set of people, very unusual set of people who become politicians, who are just a different animal. The same way, well, they are just different. You wouldn't do that job. I envy, well, not envy them, but I have huge admiration, I should say, for people who do that job. It's very hard, but they're different, and they are this group, or whoever wins, is not going to have the long experience of government which the current administration has had. So they're going to need a lot of help. Now, that immediately takes you to, how do people respond to that sort of situation? How will the ministers who'll be in charge of your departments or your ecosystems, if you're an ALB, how will they handle that? Well, the first thing that we all know is important in thinking about people's reactions to things, and I've certainly experienced this, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. So this is, look it up on Wikipedia if you don't know it, but where there's a good description. But this is the idea that if you plot on your vertical axis confidence and on your x-axis competence, it's saddle-shaped. So people who don't know a lot are probably overconfident. And I think it's inevitable, and I've been on the left-hand side of that graph myself when I started new jobs. They will be slightly overconfident, and they will need help to make sure that they don't trip up. For example, many of them won't have been involved in hiring decisions. Some of them won't even have done that in their day jobs before they became politicians. So they're going to need help, and I know that the people on this call will be particularly well positioned to do that. But Dunning-Kruger is going to affect everybody from the permanent secretary down. Now, there's a really good piece of work, and I'm going to recommend a few bits of research and work here. One is, while we were probably 2018, Professor Andrew Kakabadze and Professor Nada Kakabadze from Henley Business School did a report for the PACAC, the Public Administration Constitutional Affairs Committee, on the role of the civil service and relations with ministers, and it focused very much on the relationship between the permanent secretary and the minister. And it spoke very favourably about the civil service and actually also about ministers. It busted quite a few myths. They interviewed a lot of people, ministers, civil servants at all levels. It's still available on the parliamentary website for PACAG. And they talked about, one of the things they sort of concluded was that a permanent secretary has about 3 months to get the measure of what their new boss needs. But is it boss? What's the right analogy here? Is it, or their new guest in the hotel needs? Maybe that's a better analogy. And one of the key decisions that they have to reach on that is: are they again, no value judgment? Are they emotional or are they rational? What's their preferred mode of operation? Are they a mix? Think about the ministers you've seen and observed. Think about someone like a Michael Gove or a Philip Hammond or a Rishi Sunak versus a Boris, if you want to take that. You can model that yourself. Tony Blair versus Gordon Brown. You can see that. Gordon Brown, interesting, maybe a bit emotional and rational. So they're going to be dealing with that sort of infinite mix of things. Now, one of the tools that I think is very helpful for thinking about that is the big 5 personality factors: conscientiousness, openness, extroversion, introversion, neuroticism, and agreeableness. And actually, it's a useful tool, I would say, for thinking about different personalities. So let me give you an example. You could look at someone like Dominic Cummings, who's a very smart guy, and say, okay, he's very high on openness to new ideas. He works very hard, he's very conscientious, but he's not too bothered about what other people think about him. So he's low on agreeableness, right? So that's quite a way of thinking about it. And sometimes those combinations, just don't work for no particular reason. They don't under the circumstances. So there's going to be change at the senior leadership level among the permanent secretaries. Although we have I believe, one of the strongest that we've ever had cadres of permanent secretaries when you look at them. There'll be some changes there. Some people will be moved across, and there'll be change. We have a huge advantage that someone like Sue Gray, who understands the system, is going to be actively involved, which is only a good thing. So think about the big 5. Think also about how people absorb information. This to me was a great thing. I remember moving from Jeremy Quinn, good minister, to Theodore Agnew, also a very good minister, quite different. Suddenly, much simpler presentations, much better to get in front of him, present it verbally, than present it in a written briefing. I'm sure that when you find out early on from the private office what the preferred style is, okay? And maybe make sure that the private office knows that you're there as HR professionals and they've got an idea about what's allowed and what's not allowed and how you can help. True story. I got called up by one minister who remained nameless. He said, Rupert, I've got this guy who's applied for an apprenticeship, and he's been rejected by the Cabinet Office. And use all your humanity to get this person a job in the Cabinet Office. So I sort of, as HR professionals, we're all okay, let's have a look at this. So I as diligently looked into it. It turned out that for various reasons, including the sort of videos this person had been watching, the security had decided this person was not a suitable person to be working in government. So I made this point back to, do you actually, there's a real risk that this is a terrorist trying to get into the Cabinet Office. So I think not. But, so don't assume that the first thing you're asked to do is the right answer. And, you're there to protect the system and protect the system, first of all, Constitution and the system and those ministers, and help them get to the right place. Now, you will detect through all of this frustration, yeah. And one of the things that we need to understand about, again, as HR professionals, is the importance of, well, first of all, we need to understand about neurodiversity. Again, you will have a range of different people coming in who have different ways of thinking. Some will be verbal, some will have different forms of neurodiversity. We don't need to go into what, but they will, because everyone is different. So how do you respond to that? And we also know a lot more about dopamine in the brain. Now, one of the interesting things that doesn't really get quite enough attention is a concept that's linked to dopamine called negative prediction error. Again, do look it up. And negative prediction error means that when people don't get the outcome they expect, they are disappointed and frustrated disproportionately. So this is why it's always a bad idea to tell someone at the mid-year review they're going to be a high performer and then to disappoint them at the end of the year. That is dopamine in action, and you will pay the price for it, as we all know, right? So think about that, and you could say that there was a massive negative prediction error with the Brexit vote, perhaps for many people in the civil service. Similarly for the exit from Afghanistan, which was also very traumatic, where people were very invested in particular policy positions. Now, that's just a fact, okay? It doesn't matter whether they were the right positions or other things. And that's where, if I go back to the start of what I said about the peaceful transfer of power, in the UK, it's extraordinarily rapid. Okay, it's not, it happens overnight on the same day. So in those circumstances, people take time to catch up. So combine that with the fact that people resist change, and you're going to have some colleagues who are going to be a bit at sixes and sevens, right? So that's something to think about. By the way, just a warning, chances. Now, I'll tell you something funny, which is that I have a friend who has been talking to Labour ministers and said to them, by the way, just don't sign anything for 2 weeks. You'll get all sorts of nonsense put in front of you. Don't sign it until you know what it is, okay? So I predict, because people will be looking for places for their friends to go, and just the way the system works, and self-preservation will be in action, pay particular attention to managed moves, promotions, contractors, and things like that. Because again, there are some cunning people who like to exploit turbulence, and that may well happen. By the way, that applies in all organisations, not just in government. So I think just as we're sort of coming to the end before throwing it over for questions, a few things. First of all, things to look at. Do look at Gerald Kaufman's book on being a minister. I think still the best one that's been written. I mentioned Andrew Kakabadze. Do look out some autobiographies on both sides of the spectrum. Nigel Lawson's, if you can still get it on books, is a particularly good one. Do be aware also that people change. I just want to make that point. The minister you deal with on Friday is not going to be the same person or the permanent secretary in 6 months' time, because they will have grown and changed. People grow and change. So that's something to think about. Another great book to look at, by the way, is The Uses of History for Decision Makers by Neustadt and May. I brought it when I was an intern in Washington in 1988. Still my favorite political book. It's very good at emphasizing that people are creations of their history. So look at what people did before they came in, and particularly if they had previous ministerial experience. What did they encounter? Because it will influence the way what are the myths that you will need to bust? I think that's another way to look at it. Now, for your own protection, make sure you've downloaded and refreshed your memory of Managing Public Money, the most important book in government, so that you can stop people doing stupid things. Then do read and know your functional standards. They are writ. Treasury support them, last time I looked. And do actually read the primary legislation of CRAG, because that is the base of the Civil Service Code, statutory basis, and of course, Civil Service Code. And read the manifestos. You might wait and see which manifesto it's worth reading until the morning of the result, or have a browse, or look at some of the good summaries that are on the Times and other things, or just enter ChatGPT. What do I as an HR professional need to know? I haven't done this myself about the about the manifestos. And of course, then come back to what are we as HR professionals? Most of us are involved in that area. Understand the role of HR in any system. Keep things fair and smooth, and optimize the relationships between people. Those are the two things, right? So how do you do that in your job? Is what you're doing helping with that, and not colluding in doing something different? Now, I'm just looking at my list here, and I think I've managed to get through it, which leaves time, I think, if I may, just for 1 minute for an anecdote. My favorite anecdote in politics, in life actually, is from an American political commentator called Chris Matthews. And it's about a dinner that a US senator is at. And he is, it's one of the rubber chicken dinners, and the waiter comes around and says to him, Senator, puts a pat of butter on his plate. Some people have heard me tell the story before. And he then says, could I have another pat of butter, please? And the waiter says, I'm sorry, sir, it's only one pat of butter per guest. And he says, do you know who I am? I'm a US senator, and so on and so on. And the waiter looks at him and says, and do you know who I am? And the senator says, no. And the senator says, I'm the guy with the butter. So, and the interesting thing here is that story works in both directions. We've just elected whoever's going to be there on Friday in our great system. They're the guys with the butter in terms of political decisions and taking decisions, but in terms of protecting the processes, the people, the Constitution, the civil service values, you're the guys with the butter. And they will respect you for demonstrating that. There we go.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rupert. That was amazing. And a lot of really practical tips, I think, which is great. It's always great to leave with practical tips.